Happy January and welcome to the Global Leadership Podcast. This is a podcast for growth-minded people from all contexts who want to lead right where they are. I'm your host, Whitney Putnam, and I'm so excited that you are here because I believe that today's episode is going to give you the encouragement and the centering that you might need right now. David Ashcraft, President and CEO of the Global Leadership Network, and I are chatting about purpose and calling. At the start of the year, you might be thinking about what's next, about what's coming up. And I think this conversation will both encourage you with the unique ways God has called you to lead, and I believe it will also center you on what it's all about. We're also going to be sharing a little bit about how we at the GLN have been refocusing on our calling and why we do what we do. So let's jump right into this encouraging conversation on calling. Hey, David, Happy New Year.
Thank you, Whitney. It's a great start of the year, so Happy New Year to you as well.
Thanks so much. It's 2026. Can you hardly believe that?
That's hard to imagine.
I mean, Y2K was 26 years ago, David. That's crazy.
I was just getting ready to say, and I didn't want to date us, but I remember when we were questioning if we were still going to be around after Y2K, and here we are 26 years later. That's amazing.
We made it, David. We made it. And
Hey, Whitney, little side note, we put water in our bathtub. We filled our bathtub up just in case the water stopped. At least we had enough water in the bathtub to do something. I don't know what we were going to do with it, but we were going to do something.
Well, I'm so glad you add, and I wonder how long you kept that water in the bathtub just to make sure that you were going to be okay.
I don't know that it was over, probably just about a day, but we had it there just in case. So.
I love that so much. You know, my husband's family, he still to this day gets a little bit unhinged when he sees the big coolers of water because they just stocked those in his basement. And so he kind of can't even see them because they bring up bad memories. So, but we made it. We made it 26 years later. Can't believe it. And you know, so many people, at least I know I do this, and so many people do this, where they really start thinking, it's like they turn the calendar and they really start thinking about, what is my calling? What is my purpose? It's just like that January, I don't know, it's the January feeling. So, and this is so interesting, David. We looked this up. I mean, this is over half the people. 57% of people are wondering how they can find more meaning and purpose in their lives. So my question for you is, why does this happen in January, and why is this so important to humans?
You know, I think what's interesting with January, it's always a reset moment. And so we come in, we get this benefit of starting a new year. I know last month as we talked about reflection, I talked about the fact that in church world, every weekend, something new happens. And so our reset was always Monday. And sometimes you don't have the benefit of resetting every week. And so most of us have the benefit of resetting once a year. I think that's what January does. And you kind of makes you stop and think, what am I doing? And why am I doing what I'm doing?
Yeah, absolutely. And would you you're a pastor. And so I'm sure you would teach messages on this, et cetera. So why do you feel like having a purpose in our lives, or even revisiting that question, is so important for us?
Well, and you know what's interesting, Whitney, what I did experience, it wasn't even an age thing, because you've got young people that are kind of graduating high school, college, and they're trying to figure out, what am I doing next? And so they're asking the question. But then you got people in their 30s that are going, I've been doing this now for 12, 15 years. What am I doing? And then you get people as they enter their 60s thinking, okay, now what am I doing? What's my purpose in life? And I'm going to retire, so to speak. And so what's my value? And so I think all ages ask it. I'm not sure it ever stops. And I think what's important is, none of us want to feel like we're just taking up space. None of us want to feel like we're just eating food, breathing the air, but I'm really accomplishing nothing. And I think we all want to feel like my life mattered for something. So I think that's why we ask it.
Yeah, absolutely. I know very much it creeps up on me. And yeah, everybody that you talk to, whether or not they say it, so listeners, we hear you, whether or not you're saying it out loud, we tend to wrestle with that question. So David, you've been leading now, you led LCBC, now you're leading the GLN. You're leading tons of pastors all over and leaders all over. So I'm curious about how you've gone about defining your sense of calling And how has that changed over the years? You kind of mentioned it with generations. So I guess my first question is, how did you sense calling over your life? And then how has it changed over the years?
Well, Whitney, can I just say, I think one of the mistakes we make sometimes when we think about purpose or calling is we tend to identify it with a specific job. And so, if I'm a carpenter, then I've been called to be a carpenter. If I'm a cook, I've been called to be a cook or an accountant or whatever the specific job is. I don't know that I think that that's what calling truly is or even purpose is, because you and I could have the same purpose and do very, very different jobs. My purpose in life for me personally is to try to be an advantage to people in general, but even more so as I've gotten older, I've refined that more and more, where I just want to be an advantage or a benefit to pastors very specifically. And so I think as we get older, we begin to refine and define it a little bit more clearly, but it's not wrapped up in our specific task or job. It's something bigger than that, where I think God calls each of us to say, man, I want you to make a difference in life, regardless of the job that you're working in.
Okay, I think that I want to just pause in that for a second, because in my experience, David, the world has taught us, what do you want to be when you grow up? Right? Isn't that the question? We ask it to
Yeah.
high schoolers, we ask it to middle schoolers. What do you want to be when you grow up? And it's often vocational. And one thing I hear you saying, and I just want to clarify for everybody that's listening, maybe our calling isn't as vocational as it is characteristic. Is that what I hear you saying?
Yeah, I think our calling transcends vocation. And so whether I'm a pastor, whether I'm leading the Global Leadership Network, whether I'm cooking food for somebody, it doesn't matter really. I mean, so my joy happens because in part the skills that I have. And so when I'm able to utilize my skills in a particular vocation, that's great and that's wonderful. But I can still have a greater purpose than being an accountant or being a lawyer. When I'm serving people, I think our calling comes down to people. And whatever job we're in, we're going to cross paths with a variety of people. And so what's my purpose? What did God put me on this earth for? To do or speak into or benefit the people that I'm crossing paths with, regardless of my vocation.
I just love that framework. And I hope that this community of listeners, I think that could really free some people, David, where somebody's saying, gosh, I'm really struggling in my vocation or my job, but redefining, but I get to serve these people this way, I feel like is what I really hear you saying. I think that could really free some people.
I think so too, because I think we get frustrated with our vocation and we don't feel as challenged as maybe we want to, or we feel like nobody's noticing us the way we want. And all those are real. So we still have to deal with those things. But again, if my vocation is just an excuse to accomplish my purpose is to make a difference in people's lives. Well, I can do that if I'm serving food. I can do that if I'm serving somebody through my accounting practice or whatever it may be. And so I'm serving people. I'm trying to help them. I'm trying to give them perspective on life, trying to say, man, here's how to live life well, as I understand it, as far as what God says to live life well. Here's what you ought to be thinking about for eternity. And it doesn't matter what. I can do that as a pastor standing in front of 5,000 people, or I can do that working side by side with somebody in the kitchen. I can do that with my grandkids, and I'm trying to figure out how do I do that one-on-one with my grandkids now to say, okay, Grayson is a 3-year-old or Raina is a 6-year-old. Man, what are you thinking about eternity? And it's coming, and so let's think through that. And so, yeah, we get hung up on our vocation or our specific role. It's really so much bigger than that.
Oh man, I just think that really does get to impact the way people show up in their real lives. That is a helpful, even framework for me. And I love that you framed it up around people, that it's really around people and how we get to serve people, and how, David, that shows up so uniquely for you than it does with my skill set as well. So it's almost naming those characteristics we get to bring. That's so cool. One thing too, and I'll say this, I can really struggle with discontentment, David, and you kind of named this a little bit. And I know you've said before that sometimes you're referred to as Steady Eddie. So you're just going to keep doing the thing and the thing and the thing. And Craig Rochelle, he taught about this at GLS, where sometimes the most successful thing that we can do is to be boring. It's to do the same thing over and over again. How does that concept, that steadiness, that boring, line up with our purpose in the way that you're talking about it?
Well, I think there's a couple different levels that we can talk about purpose. I've got an individual purpose of what I'm trying to accomplish with my life. When you're in an organization, more than likely your organization is trying to accomplish something as well. And hopefully your individual purpose, your organizational purpose aligns so that you feel like, okay, I'm working at a place that has a similar goal in mind, but it may not be, but that doesn't mean you're at the wrong place. It just means that's where God has you right now at this time to make a difference and to make a difference in people's lives. But bottom line, when it comes to organizational goals, you know, you mentioned Craig O'Shell saying leadership is boring. It's doing the same thing over and over. Nick Saban, one of our summit speakers this past year, his whole mantra for his teams in football was each of you have a very specific task or job to do. You do your job well, the best that you can to your ability. And if we all do that, we're going to win as an organization. We're going to win as a team. And so I think sometimes we get bored or we look around and say, you know, well, the quarterback, the running back, the receivers, they're getting all the glory. They're getting all the attention. Here I am as a lineman. And when I was younger and played some football, just not at all an elite level. So don't want to use that illustration as an elite thing. But, you know, I was a lineman. I was big, I was slow. And so they'd always put me on the line to get in people's way. And so it'd be easy to think, man, I'm not getting the attention. And yet if I did my job well, then the quarterback could do well and we could win as a team. And so that's where the boring comes in, is just do your job, do it well. And then it puts you in a position when your team wins, then for you to be able to have even more influence or impact on other people.
Yeah, 100%. And when you touched on this organizationally, that purpose comes out a little bit differently. And so, David, I've mentioned this before on the podcast, and I really mean it. One thing I've learned from you as a leader is how you get really clear and specific on our purpose and on our goals. And you name, I think in every team meeting, most of the team meetings I'm on with you, you will state our purpose or our goals that we're reaching toward. And it sounds so simple, like, oh, everybody should be doing that. But I can't say that that's happening absolutely everywhere. And so would you say that that sense of purpose, how does that sense of purpose help you as an organizational leader get really clear on your goals for your teammates?
Well, hopefully as an organization, you're trying to accomplish something, or hopefully as an individual, you're trying to accomplish something. And so drifting, you know, one of the mistakes that people make is they drift through life, or they'll drift as an organization, and drifting never takes you anyplace good. You know, if you spend time at the beach, you spend time near the water, it's going to cause you to go away from where you want to be, not take you closer to it. And so we do that as organizations. And part of the job of a leader is to say, here's where we're headed as an organization. And I think it's the job of the leader to say, we're drifting, we're getting off. And so one of the ways you stay focused is you keep reminding people this is where we're trying to go. Therefore, doing your boring job day after day after day is actually helping us get closer to accomplishing our goal as an organization. And so I think it's the leader's job to say, here's where we're going, here's how we're going to get there, and just keep reminding people. And sometimes the leaders get bored, and so all of a sudden they'll start drifting, and everybody's working hard towards going towards point A. The leader's gotten bored and heading off to point B, and everybody's going, wait a minute, where are we going? And that brings confusion, lack of accomplishing the goals, lack of success as an organization.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And just for everybody that's listening, I think what's really cool about, I want to even name exactly how David does this in a team meeting, because as a person that's learning from David under his leadership, this is what it looks like. He'll get on a call and he'll say, hey guys, this is what we're doing at the GLN. This is our goal. This is where we're headed. And then he will clearly state out our 3 goals very clearly, and they are measurable. David, those are 3 measurable goals that we are moving toward. And then what I get to do from that, David, is I now, as my team leader, as a team leader of my team, I get to take your language and now move it down to my team. And it's crystal clear to everybody in the organization. And I just think what a cool framework for leaders to take into their orgs as well. Now, one thing that has been really interesting at the GLN, David, is we've been talking a lot about our purpose, reflecting on our purpose. And really, we're in a season of refining it or maybe even going back to our purpose. So, David, could you tell us a little bit about that and where the GLN is headed?
Yeah, so every organization is going to drift, or there's a tendency towards drifting. And so we probably drifted some as an organization where our goal, our purpose is to teach leadership, but that's not really the end goal. That's kind of the job, the task we're in. Our end goal, ultimately, if we're really honest, is to point people to Jesus Christ. Our end goal as an organization is really make a difference for eternity. And so leadership is the tool that we use towards that. And we want everybody to be better leaders. We know that everybody has influence. We know everybody wins when the leader gets better. But ultimately, we want to be making sure that we're making a difference for eternity. And where we drifted from that is we just kind of focused on the task, which was leadership, or our vocation, which is leadership. And we just had to come back and remind ourselves, okay, but there's actually a greater purpose, which is making a difference for eternity. And so we just had to remind ourselves of that, which then sharpened our focus. It gave people, it gives energy, Whitney, because when you're doing the mundane day after day after day, if there's no real end game in mind, then man, why am I doing the mundane? But if you know that ultimately I'm making a difference for eternity, then I'm willing to do the mundane after day after day after day.
Yeah, absolutely. David, for people that are huge fans of the summit that are listening, how will us refining that and getting really clear on that goal, how will that impact the summit, would you say?
Well, I think we're still going to be, there's no change in the type of speakers we have. We're still going to pull in the best speakers, leaders from around the world, just as we always have. It's just that reminder for all of us in the background. And so it may not really show up in the summit itself, but it's all of us remembering that, okay, but there's a greater purpose here. Mm-hmm. And, whether any of us realize it or not, eternity is coming. I'm getting older and I realize, okay, there's a point where I may not see my grandkids get married or things like that. So reality is there is eternity coming, and there is an end of life as we know it today. And so we've got to say, okay, then what am I going to do about eternity? And there are answers as to what we can do, how we can plan for eternity. We've got to be thinking that way. And I know all of us know that. And we can either put our heads in the sand and say it's not going to happen, or let's face it, eternity is coming. And so as an organization, we can say, let's teach leadership. But if we never address the what about eternity question, then we've kind of done a disservice to everybody that's a part of the summit or everybody that's ever been a part of the summit. And so making sure that we, in some subtle way, at least point towards eternity.
Yeah, man, that's so good. And it's certainly, David, that's the way, right? It can get lost. We don't necessarily want to think about it. Like you said, we can put our heads in the sand and not think about it. But I know I love getting to work for an organization that ultimately eternity really, really matters, and telling other people about Jesus really, really matters. Well, the last question I have for you, if you were having coffee with a leader that you've been mentoring or kind of seen their life, and you wanted to share just a little piece of encouragement as they moved into their January about being the best leader that they can be, what would you tell them?
Man, Whitney, I think, a definition of a leader is that people are following. It's somebody that's out in front, and it doesn't have to be far. You can just be a step ahead. You can be 2 steps ahead. The danger is getting too far ahead of people, and then all of a sudden they can't follow you. But by definition, somebody that's a leader, people are following. And so I hope that we as leaders have a plan of where are we taking these people. And hopefully we're not just wandering around mindlessly or aimlessly, but we know where we're taking people, which means then ultimately we need to have a plan and thinking through here are the steps that we're going to take to get from point A to point B, from here to there, as it was described in a summit in the past. And even if we don't tend to be planners, I tend to love plans. I thrive. I live for plans. I love to create plans. I love to execute a plan. I love to evaluate how did we do. Now let's move on and do better. So I thrive on that. But I realize everybody doesn't. But naturally, a leader's got to have some kind of plan. And so I think each year as we start the year, where are we taking our team, the people that are following us? And then I think even how am I going to grow personally? If I'm going to keep leading these people, then what am I doing to enhance my capacity? Which I think fits so well with the Leadership Summit, Whitney, because that's what we do. We say here is a place Here are tools to help you grow as a leader so you can be better at leading your people. And so it's a natural flow into what happens around the Leadership Summit.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to loop all the way back as we just land this conversation to what you mentioned at the beginning, because it is the Leadership Summit, right? We have so much great content. The world's best leaders are on that stage teaching us. And yet I think it's so beneficial for us to think about, okay, well, I can go into that space and I can learn from these leaders and it can help me in the vocation that I'm in right now, but it's really helping me grow as a human. And I think that's just so valuable. And I really hope people lean into that thought about, how do I get to show up in the world? And the summit can shape you in whatever season you're in, David, as I'm sure you've seen in your own life, and I have too. So I love that. And I hope our community really sits and thinks about that good thought that you brought us about just growing in our characteristics of how we're wired. So,
and not just so that I can be better as an individual, but so that I can help other people, serve other people.
That's right. And that's where the freedom is. That's where the goodness is right there.
Exactly.
David, thanks so much for joining us. And again, happy January. I hope you have a great month.
Thanks, Whitney. You as well.
Thanks, David. Thank you for joining us for that conversation as we were talking about calling and how it transcends vocation. What thoughts were popping up for you? What do you believe your unique calling is, regardless of what your career or life stage might look like right now? David mentioned that for him, regardless of his job, people are his calling. People are his calling, serving people and sharing Jesus with them. My calling is centered around people too. Personally, I love connecting with people and learning their stories and their strengths and then unleashing them into their potential. Nothing makes me happier than a deep conversation and being able to cheer for them. I can do this at work, and I can also do this with my friends and family because calling transcends vocation. So what is your calling that goes beyond everything else? Maybe it's a wrong in the world that you are called to make right, or maybe it's a calling to love deeply, or maybe it's sharing truth bravely. Knowing that calling and keeping it at the center will allow you to actually work through the boring mundane and push through the challenges, because your life and leadership really matter. We believe deeply that God has placed you here for a purpose, and we're standing here with you as you discover or simply stay on that path of purpose. Thank you so much for joining us today on the Global Leadership Podcast, and remember that everyone wins when the leader gets better.